So in this section, we're going to talk about non-monogamy, which comes up a lot in sex therapy. But before we begin, I just want to make sure that that I say that the tenets that come from the non-monogamy groups are really interesting and probably quite effective from what I understand about human behavior. Because the reality is romantic sexual relationships aren't really working, and we know that, well, working in the way that we expect them to work, at least. And this is because our expectations are widely unattainable when it comes to sexual romantic relationships. And so anytime expectations are not achievable and ideals are not achievable, then the people start to feel shame, and that shame, I mean, everything starts to go to shit. And so the non-monogamy movement has, kind of given us less ideal, the ideals and expectations are up for change. And so you get to kind of design your own way of interacting with people romantically and sexually. And that's super cool. And I know that that's the future, and it probably should be the future, and it might fix what's problematic today. Although, having said that, everybody has a right to what they want to do. There are people that don't want to do it, and there are people that do, and that's fine. But what happens a lot of time is that people are wounded, like I've been talking about this whole entire time. And so their wounds don't let them engage in non-monogamy in the way that they would want to. And so if somebody has a wounding of being rejected or being abandoned or not being sexually desirable, and you put them in the situation of non-monogamy where they have to kind of handle these events that are just exactly going towards those wounded points, they might not be able to handle it because they haven't healed from those wounds. And right now we're so wounded. Everybody's just so wounded. I don't know, even though the non-monogamy movement is awesome, I don't know if a lot of people can actually do it. So that's just to start off with. I think you need to understand that as a therapist, because I think we're also feeling, weirdly enough, pressure to be non-monogamous, especially in the place where I'm living, which is Portland, Oregon. And so a lot of people come in with this expectation that they should be non-monogamous, and that if they're not, that somehow or another that means that they're not emotionally evolved enough or aren't cool enough or whatever it is. So to be able to not push the agenda of non-monogamy if that person either doesn't want to or just simply can't engage in it, and that it's okay to not want to be non-monogamous, and it's okay to want to be non-monogamous as well. So that's a start. A lot of people come in wanting to either open up their relationship or navigate their currently open relationship, but they haven't done any of the work that is required in order to set them up for success rather than failure. So I often recommend reading the book More Than Two. That book will help them out philosophically, because super important to understand this in a philosophical way, and also in practical terms. So I don't even spend that much time. I spend some time negotiating, the expectations and the beliefs about this, but I think it's really important for them to get to the nitty-gritty of it by reading this book. And so they go and do that, and a lot of people have had success reading that. And sometimes I think I suggest the book even with people that are struggling with their partner, they're jealous, or they've had some infidelity, and they don't understand, they just can't get past their own pain about that. And the philosophy that is presented by the non-monogamous groups is really refreshing and can help you navigate some of this pain. What gets in the way of us being able to do a lot of things is fear. And so to address what fears are coming up, especially if there's one partner that isn't really wanting to do the non-monogamy, so to address, well, what are you worried about? What are you worried about with opening up the relationship? And they can say all kinds of things, but basically is that you'll fall in love with somebody else, that you'll leave me, that I won't be good enough. And to be able to state those fears is important, And also to think about, again, does this just belong to this event, or do I have a history with this? Because if you have a history with it, you want to go back and heal from that history before you can even start to engage in something that's creating that fear, right? So coming up with the fear involved in therapy in general is really important. So I often ask the question, well, what are you worried about? And then getting to the kind of the root cause of the fear. So for a lot of people, when they're engaging in non-monogamy, is the fear of being abandoned or being chosen by somebody else, being chosen over, somebody else chosen over them. So that's really important to see if there's a history, if not. And then also to strategize, like what would help ease this fear for you when you're thinking about opening up the relationship. And so that's super important. And how, the question as a therapist that I don't know if I still have an answer for, a complete answer for it, but how do you help people get rid of fears? How do you get rid of your own fears? So that's something to think about. Like, if you don't have an answer to that, that's probably something that you should get an answer to, or at least a beginning answer, because that's our bread and butter, is fear. And so how do we help people navigate fear, or just, heal from the fear? And so some of the things that I've talked about before, which is, going back in the past and doing inner child work and doing parts work, and also, being able to feel the fear rather than react to it, is super important. But then, fear is also about identity and value systems. And so as we age, we lose a lot of things, and we are constantly faced with like, oh, now I don't get to have that. Now where am I going to get my value from? So let's say, the fear of not being in a relationship, for example. Like, if I'm not your partner, if I'm not in a relationship with you, who am I? What makes me valuable if you don't want me? And that's I think it's an exceptional moment for growth when you can say, whoa, I get all my value from here, and I'm really scared of losing that thing, let's say sexual desirability. Like, up until now, my whole thing has been about being sexually desirable. And now, let's say you're aging and you're losing that. You say, oh my God, I don't have that anymore. Where am I going to get my value from? What's going to make me valuable if it's not this one thing? And so, and I think the process of stating to yourself, well, I don't have that anymore, so am I going to sit here and just like fret over it, or can I look to something else? Can I choose to let go of that value system and that identity? Yeah, I have this couple that I'm working with now where, it's pretty typical. The guy's really wanting to have it. That's not typical. Actually, it's pretty half and half. But in this particular case, the guy wants to have an open relationship once. And one of the questions that I always ask is, what do you get from sex? So that we're clear about what they're looking for. It's not just like fucking. It's about all this other thing. And for this particular person, it's about feeling excited and having a sense of validation. And sometimes when you don't have the opportunity to get that, sometimes getting it from somebody else can be problematic, although totally normal. So you have to kind of assess whether their need for validation and excitement is dysfunctional, or is it just coming from a natural place. So going back to the example of this couple, so he really wants to engage in this open relationship, but she wants nothing to do with it. She's actually very triggered and is remembering the beginning of their relationship where he chose somebody else over her. And also her, going to the root of the problem where she what are you worried about? What's the question? I'm worried that I won't be good enough. I'm worried that this other person will be better than me. And when you find out from her history, she's struggled with her femininity and being wanted by other men, and that this is her first partner, so to speak. And so, having that history where you're struggling with the idea of being sexually desirable, and also having an event where your husband chose somebody over you before you got married, creates quite a difficult situation. So it takes some work to figure out, like, oh, this is what I'm worried about. This is where it's coming from. Let us work on this pain and see where I am after I work on this pain. There's this other thing that comes up with non-monogamy is that for a lot of people, this is their This is something that they can't live without. And so I've had clients go through painful process of feeling guilt and shame and tremendous love for this person, but knowing that they can't be with them because the person can't be in a non-monogamous relationship. And you can do all the psychological kind of gymnastics that you want with this, but when it comes down to it, it's just about doing what you feel is good for you at great cost, which includes a lot of loss and sorrow and feeling guilty and shameful because you want this thing that society has in general not accepted yet. So it's difficult for those people that are struggling with that and to leave their loved ones for this thing that is not quite accepted. The other thing you have to be careful about is a lot of people want to jump into non-monogamy when they're like a mess, like a mess. And like I said before, you have to be in a really good, strong place in order to engage in non-monogamy. And so you got to clean up your house a bit before, because you have to feel secure to have your partner be doing things that are totally against what the romantic and sexual scripts tell us they should be doing. So that's really important to kind of slow people down and say, wait a second, let's kind of work on these other things before you jump into the non-monogamy. The other thing that comes up, which is super interesting, is that the man will pull the woman into non-monogamy, and she'll reluctantly go on OkCupid and put up her profile, and then she's bombarded by all these men that want to go out with her. But yet the non-monogamous man is having a lot of issues because, according to our gender script at this time, women are less likely to go out with a man that's married and wants to engage in non-monogamy, and may even see him as creepy and creepy. This old creepy guy that wants to go out with other women and maybe even believe that their wife doesn't know about it. But yet the woman, there are plenty of men that want to engage sexually with her, even if she's married. So, and then what happens is that the man wants to pull back and says, wait a second, I didn't think it was going to go this way. How about if we don't do this? And that's really hard, as you can imagine, because this woman reluctantly goes to this, and then she's having some success with it, and then her partner wants to pull out of it. Like, that's hard. So that's something that happens a lot. And so I tell women that when they're worried about whether can I get anybody else, I'm like, in my experience, it's like you'll be bombarded by people that want to go out with you.